All right, here we go. Hi there, folks. Saber4 here. Going to talk today about the red, green, and hero shell. We're going to get to a bit of a deep dive on this, so we're going to cover multiple leaders. I've got my water bottle here beside me. If I pause to take a drink, we're going to be here for a while. So let's go ahead and get going. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Helps me out a lot. Really enjoying seeing the growth and just want to kind of continue doing this. But what we'll see in this video, we will talk about the heroic aggression leaders. We'll talk about why we skipped certain ones and the ones that are in this video. We'll talk briefly about the bases that unlock it all and kind of what has transpired around them. We'll look at some of the key aggression cards. We'll break that out into ground units, base units, and toolbox cards. And then the choices, so the command cards that are with us. And there we'll talk again about ground space and toolbox. We'll talk a little bit about crafting a deck and give some samples as we go, and then close up with some final thoughts. Let's go ahead and dive on in. So the heroic aggression leaders. As a card choice, we skipped Cassian because he is conditional for his card draw, and he also costs a resource to do so on his leader side. We skipped Bo-Katan because right now that Mandalorian tribe is relatively small. We skipped Ahsoka because her action requires coordinate. There's a full video already on Anakin on this channel, and so I skipped him because I have a much more extensive discussion on just Anakin. And then time constraint, and he's not really specific to this type of shell just because he is, unlike the rest of these, he is a Force user, and this is going to focus mostly on the things that are not. That means that we will cover Sabine Wren, Luke Skywalker, Poe Dameron, Han Solo, and this is the second Han Solo, so young Han, Han2, whatever you want to call him. The leader abilities. You are building a deck around a leader ability. If you are playing a deck and you are not using that action, you're not using that effect, why are you playing that deck? Why are you in? You might stay in that color pattern, but you might have something that fits you better. And so it's very helpful to know what these are. Most of these are pretty well known, and so we're going to go through them just briefly. On the leader side, Sabine is a ping to each base. On her unit side, she deals 1 damage to the enemy base with every attack. Han Solo is a resource cheat at the cost of damage, so you play something once per turn. You play something from your hand, it costs 2 less. It costs 1 less, but you deal 2 damage to it. On his leader unit side, he has the same ability without the exhaust, so he is able to do that multiple times per turn if you have units to put out there. Luke is targeted damage if he is piloting. Now he makes a pretty sturdy pilot at 4/5. That is a nice bonus. It's one of the larger ones available to one of these leaders. And unlike the rest of the leaders that are out there that are pilots, this upgrade cannot be defeated by enemy card abilities. Now you can still get rid of that unit in multiple ways, but you cannot get rid of Luke Skywalker as a leader by using defeat abilities. And then finally there's Poe. Poe is a reusable boost to small vehicles or to all vehicles. Just a cost of a resource, and he drops a +2/+1 onto any vehicle. He does not have a unit side ability at all when he is on the ground. He's a 4/6, and that's not terrible stats. It's actually fairly good. That is better stats than Han. That is much better stats than Sabine. But he loses his ability to ship hop. The good thing about him is that he also, as a unit, he can come out on the same turn that he is defeated as a pilot. So you have the opportunity to do a lot of things with Poe and to move him around quite a bit as a roaming bonus, and then also get him back as a unit in several different ways. Let's talk bases for a minute. Most of the time that you're running this, you are going to be running one of the rare bases, and specifically one of these 2 rare bases, either the Energy Conversion Lab or the Data Vault. Energy Conversion Lab is going to skew a lot more aggressive because you are giving up 5 health off of a set 1 through 4 common 30 hit point base. I say set 1 through 4 because in set 5 we are going to see 28 point common bases, but so far we are giving up 5 points off of a 30 point common base. And then Data Vault we have talked about in some other videos, and you're gaining 3 health, but you're gaining 3 health at the cost of 10 extra cards in your deck. That is not necessarily a detriment. It is a small hit to your ability to draw any one individual card. But there are many, many places where having that extra health is going to be beneficial enough to offset its cost. Why is it that we're talking about these two specifically? Well, because these are the two kind of polar opposites that sort of define how that deck works. If you could play the Sabine in 30, you could play the young Han in 30, you could play the Luke, you could play any of these in the 30 health base. It's not going to be to your detriment to do so, but you start to ask the question, am I better off adding an ambush? Is there something else about my math that is going to be benefited by me playing a card with ambush and keeping tempo and being more aggressive, versus am I more mid-range? And with that mid-range, is there value to having the 3 extra health, the 10% extra life that's there? So the one other thing that I'll say about bases right now is that, especially as we look at Han, a good portion of why we are including him in this is the current downtrend in Tarkentown. And a part of that current downtrend in Tarkentown has to do with this same relationship. Has to do with an 8-point gap between Data Vault, which is a big riser over the last couple of weeks, and the 25 health of Energy Conversion Lab and Tarkentown. And so that 8 health is extremely consequential when you talk about where these bases go. And if we start to see a shift back towards the middle, especially if we start to see a shift back towards Tarkentown in use, you might want to seriously evaluate young Han. All right, key aggression ground units. These 5 cards are going to be in just about any. They are the staples to a ground game for these aggression decks. A thing to note here is that the aggression units are these are exclusively unique units. And so, unlike the command units that we'll look at, which are largely non-unique units, you're only going to be able to have one of these on the board. All of these have a toolbox of some sort that they are uniquely good in. Sabine being unable to be attacked if you have a third aspect among other friendly units. And so if you're playing command and you've got 2 units out, you've got command, you've got heroism, and you've got aggression on those other 2 units, she can't be attacked. Cassian being able to come out on 5 if you smuggle him and be readied makes him a great thing to kind of stick in your resource row early. Or you can play him out as a 3/5 on the ground for 3, which is always a good play. K2SO, a beautiful ambush target, especially if he can overwhelm through something and defeat it, or even if he's going to take lethal damage himself, because you can go ahead and pop overwhelm damage where applicable and still wind up with a unit that does 3 extra damage to the base. Poe just has very, very high utility. He is able to take out a 8 health unit by himself. He's able to defeat upgrades. He's able to return. He's able to force discard. He's able to just do a lot of things, on top of the fact that he is a huge body at 6/6 for a 5 cost. And then Wrecker remains the best just quick splash of high damage, high yield, being able to go 2 for 1. He is Sabine's primary ECL target, though he's not the only one that can be done. That 12 damage to the board and base, or to the board and base, is just incredibly difficult to deal with. And Wrecker remains one of the better reach cards for this entire shell. These units in quantity are going to be the ones that show up basically across all versions of red-green shell. The space units. Green Squadron A-Wing has been the staple since the beginning. I am trialing moving away from the Green Squadron A-Wing and moving towards the Red Squadron Y. They keep the same stats on defense. And yes, you're going to use indirect damage, but quite often, especially if I am playing with initiative, I would rather have that Red Squadron Y-Wing and be able to force my opponents to choose between base health and unit health, especially if I'm going to be able to now trade favorably. Still, that Green Squadron A-Wing remains kind of the gold standard, and I have no problem with one choice over the other. But I've played a lot of Luke, and especially a lot of Luke Red, and so I've been trialing the Red Squadron Y-Wing as a part of what I play, and just kind of choosing at turns between it and the A-Wing to kind of see which one I like better. And usually when I'm playing them, I wind up going for the Red Squadron Y-Wing. Red 3 and Red 5. Red 3 is good, and that's about all we can say about it. Adding raid to everything that's friendly, because most of the stuff that's in your deck is going to be heroism, can be very helpful, especially if you're not really being interacted with in space. But if you're not being interacted with in space, your opponents are going to have trouble, because these are all pretty good space units for pretty cheap, and you're going to be able to throw down several of them. And so the delta between a 3/4 on red 5 that deals 2 damage to a damaged unit and the 2/3 stat line of red 3, which just provides raid 1, I am picking to put down red 5 in most situations, and especially if I'm looking to my last few cards. Red 5 is a very early inclusion. Red 3 is a very late one. Sabine's Masterpiece, especially as we talk about having two colors. Sabine's Masterpiece is a great inclusion. This is a good inclusion in really any hero shell right now. 3/3 for 3 is not much better than red 3, but the on attack abilities that are there are all very good, and so this is a must include if you're looking at building a space presence in a heroism shell. And then finally, Black 1 is on here. This is the jump to lightspeed Black 1, because where we are playing with Poe, and since he is a big ground unit for us, Black 1 has some very nice effects when we are able to pair it with Poe being on the board in any form. So these are the staples of the space units. Toolbox cards. There's a lot of them. I didn't show them all here, but I listed several of them, and I'm going to talk about the ones that I showed. Events for a cause I believe in, which is going to matter a lot, especially if your deck is very heroism focused. Heroic Sacrifice is very good, and it can be very good no matter what deck you're putting it in. Even though it is defeating a unit, quite often this allows you to trade up if necessary. It's got K2 on it because that is a great target for it. Play it with him, go for 6, splash some overwhelm, defeat your unit, do exactly what you wanted to do. Metal Ceremony is another good one that I did not show here. Metal Ceremony is good if you are able to go wide. If you are not able to go wide, I would not include it, just because you are looking, if you're not able to go wide and go rebel, because it's kind of worthless if you're not doing both of those things. Let's talk about Hotshot Maneuver for a second. I run a deck that is built around the on-attack synergy. And where I've run decks that are built around that, Hotshot Maneuver is a murder weapon. I mean, this thing can really get in there and do some damage, especially if you can load up a couple of abilities on one particular unit. That is very easy to do with the Luke Leader. And with the Luke Leader, that is a near must-have in 3 of, because you can pop damage prior to your on attack abilities, and then run your on attack abilities, and then run your attack. And so you're able to clear a lot of things with hotshot maneuver that you might not otherwise. Similarly, stay on target. This is one of the reasons why I like that Red Squadron Y Wing. With my A Wing, I could use stay on target. I can attack the base for 5. Hooray. With the Red Squadron Y Wing, I can attack the base for 3 and do 3 indirect damage. And if you put any of that indirect damage on the base, I draw 2 cards. I like that a lot better. Because on attack is a part of this attack with the vehicle unit, your card text still applies. And so if they put indirect damage on their base, then that is a part of the attack and an instance, a separate instance of dealing damage to the base. So draw a card during the on attack indirect damage, and then draw a card again during the attack. This is a good portion of why I like and why I consider that Red Squadron A-Wing, that Green Squadron A-Wing to be slightly the inferior card right now. Fighter heavy considerations, you've got some vehicle units. If you don't have a lot of them, if you're not running Poe or Luke, you might stay away from stay on target if that's the case. But if you're running Poe or Luke, you might also consider trench run, because if you're dropping pilots on things, the ability to go +4 is a massive swing, and some of your units can be very, very sturdy. Other toolbox cards. These are all units, but these are all toolbox cards because they do specific things. Fighters for Freedom, which is a saboteur, which is not heavily relevant in most cases, but it allows you to. It's a beacon card. If I'm playing a lot of red, it's something that my opponents feel the need to attack, because every time I play a red card, I deal a damage to their base. And not being able to mitigate that, they usually kind of see that beacon and will come towards it. And that can kind of keep the heat away from some things, or just force some card choices and some sequencing choices that might not otherwise be there. I like that in a card. And so that is one of the things that I do consider quite often. Biggs has a good place in some of these. He has a lot of utility, especially if you're playing vehicles. He does different things based on the vehicle that he's in and can really kind of make some headaches with math. And then the final 2 are here as considerations for equipment, for any kind of upgrades, because Ketsuonyo and Frisk both are upgrade removal. They're both decent powered units on the ground, but they are upgrade removal units. All right, let's move into command. These choices are really going to be based on your deck configuration. Most of these that we're talking about are going to be things that are non-unique. The Battlefield Marine is, in 90% of cases, if you are playing Red Green Hero, that is your preferred turn 1 play. It's the best statted unit that we've got. It is a far superior play to Sabine if you are, especially if you don't have initiative. And if I have the 2 of them in my hand and I do not have initiative, then I'm going to resource Sabine and I'm going to put the Battlefield Marine on play. If you play Sabine down second and your opponent gets initiative, Battlefield Marine just eats it. This is the turn 1 play that you should be making most of the time if you're playing into the ground arena. Luke Skywalker, are you still with me? 3-2 with piloting ability and the ability to show up as a unit if you've piloted and that unit gets defeated. Has a lot of legs. This is a good place to consider it. This is just one of those kind of key cards. At 3 cost, I put the Echo Base Defender in here, a much more rarely used card, because we're going to be looking at some decks that use General Riken. Riken. We're going to go with Riken because it's got the 2 E's. Echo Base Defender, yes, it's a 4/3 Sentinel, but if you can put it out in a place and a time where it might not get attacked, or you might be able to put it out after your opponent has attacked through a ground arena, and you're able to claim and get. Actually, I like Riken better, but you're able to get Riken down on there. Now you're talking about something that's a 5/4 Sentinel, and you really can start eating up a lot of units that are there. So he's a consideration, especially in Han. At 4 cost, the Poe Dameron, one hell of a pilot, who gives you a lot of value. And again, this is a bigger consideration in Han because we can play him for 3 and then ignore the 2 damage essentially because we stick him on the ship that he created or stick him on something that we had played previously. And then finally, we have the Reinforcement Walker down there at the bottom, which is another big consideration for late game ground. Sabine is unlikely to use it unless she is really kind of playing off her game. It might be a consideration for your sideboard sometimes. But otherwise, this is one of those that is more useful in the vehicle-based decks of Poe or in the cheat resources deck of Han. Space units. Phoenix Squadron A-Wing, which is a generic A-Wing, very similar to what's going on with the Green Squadron. Has the stat of 3 the entire time, gives up a little bit of health as a result. Blue Leader, which I did not show on here, is a great ambush craft and can ambush in both ground and space. The Adelphi Patrol Wing is a good one, especially if you have initiative. Allows you to basically play a Fleet Lieutenant and attack +2/+0. Good tempo play. The Bright Hope that we have here is a nice big Sentinel. Not a whole lot of attack to it, not a very aggressive unit at all, but can stall quite a bit in space because it takes most fighters 2 attacks to get through. And then finally Home 1, which we'll show on a later slide. Great card to get in, especially if you can play it for 7, because playing it for 7 with Han allows you to get 10 of value out of it. So those are my command space units. And then here's the toolbox cards. Rebel Assault, if you're playing Rebel Heavy, is quite valuable. It's a great tempo play. It allows us to go +1/+1 on those 2 attacks and to squeeze off 2 attacks back to back for just 1 resource. The Darksaber is a key toolbox card for Sabine, and even the threat of a Darksaber with Sabine can make people kind of rethink how they're going to do your 4 resource turn. And so, leading off that Sabine turn by attacking with a unit and leaving 4 open can often alter what they're thinking about and how they're sequencing. Timely Intervention is a good card that is a high part of why I play green at all. Play it on both sides, heroism and villainy. Love to play it for its cost of 1. Perfectly fine to play it for its smuggle cost of 2. And then we have some more kind of toolbox things. Eject, Salvage, Lightspeed Assault. Salvage letting it's a 0 cost, and if that unit gets defeated, I'm kind of 2 for 1ing myself. But only kinda, because I got that unit out of my discard pile. And so don't think of this as a 2 for 1. That vehicle was already lost. This is play another copy of it, even without having to draw it. So if somebody takes out one of your vehicles that you want back, salvage it. Lightspeed Assault is a thing that I have tampered with. I don't think it's in any of the deck lists that I'm going to show today, but this can be huge into somebody that plays the blue-green villainy shell. They're usually getting up to something like an Avenger or a Devastator, something that has a lot of power. And if you've got kind of a leftover unit out there in space, and my options are to put 2 damage into the Devastator or to defeat that friendly space unit, put the 2 damage into the Devastator, and force them to take 10 indirect, that is a massive, massive shift. And Lightspeed Assault can be a huge weapon in those space decks and should be a consideration for your sideboard at the very least. Traitorous is a good one, although the tempo of Traitorous is not wonderful. It is also something that you should be very aware of because you are going to wind up playing a lot of things that cost 3 or less. And then I put little stars there. Lightspeed, Assault, Eject, Salvage are all bigger considerations for the vehicle and pilot decks. All right. What do I think of when I am crafting a deck? When I am putting things together and sitting down, not really in front of a pile of cards. I usually do this on a computer screen, but when I am sitting down to build a deck, what are the thoughts that are going through my head? How am I getting from I want to build something to a first run at a finished product? Um, First off, always start off with an end goal. Begin with that end in mind. Choose your archetype. What am I trying to build out of this? Am I trying to build an aggressive deck, a mid-range? And in this cases, because we're talking about villainy, or because we're not talking about that blue-green villainy shell, we're not talking about hard control, we're talking about things that are aggression or mid-range in a green-red hero, those are the two places that I'm going. Or am I trying to do something that has answers for both? Am I trying to be a little bit of that gap between aggro and mid range? If you are playing very aggressive, your sideboard needs to have answers for mid range. If you are playing very mid range, you are going to need answers for control. If you're running combo, your sideboard should have a little bit of answers for both, but a little bit more answers for control because your pivot towards a more aggressive deck. It should be something that your deck is able to do without sideboarding. Your pivot towards dealing with a control deck should be something that requires, should require a little bit less energy and effort. This should be able to adapt to what's around it a little bit better. Now we match a leader. Sabine is probably the best that you have in pure aggression. Han2 is reasonable at go wide and is reasonable at being very aggressive with that and being very overwhelming. But as you'll see when we talk about the deck lists, I think that a Sabine mid-range and a Han go wide are very similar to one another. And I think that Sabine does it better. And so I've stuck with the Sabine Data Vault as our go wide strategy for red green hero rather than go with a Han 2 go wide. I also think that in that matchup, Sabine's ability to ping is a little bit more impressive than Han's ability to get out small units, not the big ones, but to get out the small units in pairs. Han 2, Luke, Poe, Sabine, Data Vault are all good, strong mid-range. Sabine turns the corner very well. Han has the earlier access to a top end, and his go tall strategy is a thing that we're going to talk about and cover. Luke and Poe play the hybrid combo game and can lean in to some very heavily combo-based play. We talked about ECL. We've talked about Data Vault. Choosing a base is, kind of that next thing. If I am playing super aggressive, Sabine ECL is still a great deck, and it's just about going to put itself together. Sabine Data Vault is a little more progressive of a deck and something that your opponents are going to have to know a little bit better going forward since this did win a regional. But it's not something that people really have memorized just because the play lines are relatively new. So think about where you're going with your base. Just the tempo that you've created and the ability to stop damage coming into your base. Does that justify the delta of 8 health? And then the last thing that I'm doing as I am putting the deck together, and especially as I'm getting down to my card choices at the end, is the idea of consistency in the main and answers in the side. I tend to build around the idea of playing a bunch of 3-ofs and very few 2-ofs. And if I can avoid it, I will not play a 1-of unless it is something that is, hey, this card can win me the game. And so since that's 2% of my draw in a 50 card deck and 1.8% of my draw in a 60 card deck, would I be better served at bumping something that can keep me out of that trap from 4% to 6%? Or am I better served to have that, draw for it and hope answer? Um, we're going to talk about these leader by leader, and we're going to talk about some of the things before we get to the card choices, and then we will show the decks. So, Sabine ECL, this is a deck that I have saved called the Gatekeeper. The biggest thing with it is you want to make sure you're building so that you don't miss a turn one play. I use all 5 of those aggression units that we talked about as 3 ofs. I go 3 Battlefield Marines, 2 to 3 Lukes, and the other 2 to 3 Sundaris. Green Squadron and Phoenix A-Wings are 5 ofs, or you could mix in the Red Squadron and Y-Wings, either one, and then 3 Sabine's Masterpiece. But hey, look, in that you've got 31 to 32 cards. 15 of those are your turn one plays. And just about everything that's in your low end of the curve is right there. And you built 32 cards without thinking about it. The tempo and utilities for that. Fleet Lieutenant is always a good one because you are targeting heroism. Rebel Assault is a decent one as long as you stayed pretty heavy on Rebel. For a cause I believe in, I rarely lean so far out of heroism in this that I don't do anything less than a 3 of for a cause. Chewbacca is my first thought, besides maybe a Sundari, for a 2 of. And the reason why he's a 2 of here is that I don't love him on the ground. But if your opponent isn't playing control and you can stick him in a first turn space unit, he can steal games. Like that's a lightsaber on a spaceship. It's a +3/+3 that you can't just get rid of, and is just so hard to deal with if you're coming out swinging for 5 or 6 in your opening turns. Just a nightmare to try and contend with. This only leaves like less than 10 card choices in that Sabine ECL. Often use things like Wing Leader, Heroic Sacrifice, Timely Intervention. You can use Dark Sabers here. This is a pretty easy deck to put together because a lot of the choices are so strong that they're hard to move away from. Data Vault, which we'll also see, has a little bit more forgiving of a health pool, but a little bit less forgiving of a draw. As a result, I'm running 18 turn 1 plays. The other reason why I'm running that many has to do with my turn 4 sequencing. I know that I'm going to have to play a timely intervention if I am going to ambush out of that deck. I've got a couple of units that can ambush naturally, but for the most part, if I'm playing ambush, it's because I played timely intervention. As a result, my preferred sequencing on the Sabine flip, if I can do it, is to be able to play multiple units in addition to having a couple of attacks if possible. And the reason for that is that I want my opponents to have to declare through their actions what they are going to do about the Sabine flip. And you've got the dirtle action of being able to ping both bases, and especially the space to be able to do so when you're talking about being on a 33 health base on your own side. It has a larger space package, a full suite of those aggression crown cards, and I use Fighters for Freedom in that deck. There are less events. I think I played 38 units in this. We're going to see the list that won we're going to see a modification of the list that won the regionals. I've made a couple of tweaks of my own, or just personal preferences, though that one is it won a regional. But there's only 9 there's only 9 events in it. 3 Rebel Assaults, 3 Timely Interventions, 3 for a cause. Card choices that I have, are mostly things that I kind of wanted to try, and sort of see how they fit in here. So like the Tactical Heavy Bomber, Chance and Dula, a couple of top end units. And those are especially things where, if good grief, if somebody leaves a tactical heavy bomber alone for a turn and you manage to get it above 3 attack, it can also really start to steal games late. Stands up very, very well. The Sabine Data Vault stands up very well to the Sabine ECL. This is not a surprise. Mid-range typically beats aggro. We went very mid-range with Sabine Data Vault. We do very well against Sabine ECL. And the 8 extra health is just monumental. All right, this is the Gatekeeper. This is the Sabine ECL. Like I said, most of the card choices are made for us. This is just it in visual form. In a lot of cases, with the exception of Sundari Peacekeeper over here, which that's interesting. That's why. The Fighters for Freedom should be a 3 of. Or you could make that 3 of Blue Leader. That's just kind of your choice. Sundari was the 2 of in this list, along with Chewbacca and Wing Leader and the Phoenix Squadron A-Wing. You could go up on... You could put another Timely in your sideboard. You could go up to 3 on your Sundari Peacekeepers. This is just the visual representation of that Gatekeeper deck. This is the visual of the mid-range version of it. As you can see, this is an entire block of 3 ofs. We're going for a little bit... We're trying to get rid of a little bit of the inconsistency of draw by going just 3 of everything. This uses red 5, which I feel is the more powerful card. As I said, I went Tactical Heavy Bomber in the same spot as Senatorial Corvette. I gave up a couple of attack for 1 more health, and I think that I wanted to try out the on-attack ability that's there. You do have a couple of things here in the sideboard which I consider as very good swaps, and things that you might want to consider main decking, kind of depending on where you are, what you're playing into, and what your local meta is like. If you see a lot, and especially as we are seeing more of the Kira Data Vault, if you're seeing a lot of people that ramp, Chance and Dula goes in the main. If you're seeing a lot of ability to get yourself to the end game, consider putting in your Crate Dragon. If you're seeing a lot more of people who are playing upgrades, you don't have a whole lot of it, but you do have Frisk to be able to put back in here and kind of be able to pop some of those upgrades away from your opponents. Han2. Why did I not show you anything really about the Go Wide? You'll see the deck in just a minute, and I went just with the Go Tall version. That Go Tall version is Co Dameron's deck. He was the PQ winner. I live in Florida. He was the PQ winner down here in Altamont Springs. And we'll show you that version of the deck. He played against a Go Wide version of Han2, and granted, while that player made his way into the finals of a PQ with a Go Wide, the reality is that the Go Tall just handled it. And I think that it's the better of the two. Because Go Wide is Sabine without the pings. Your leader comes out a turn late. It doesn't really add that much. It adds 1 point in attack, but doesn't necessarily go to the base. It gets you 1 more point in health, but that's not necessarily a benefit with Han, because if you are not able to use his ability before your opponent defeats him in a turn, then you lose that ability for a turn, and that is very, very detrimental to him. And so I feel like the better version of this is the Go Tall. Both versions of this should be mindful if Tarkin Town starts to make a resurgence. Trading the unit that I paid 3 for to deal with something that you paid 4 for feels great. Yes, they're both a 4-cost card, but I played a 5 this turn, and my ready 4-cost card dealt with your 4. I'm fine with that. Paying 3 for a unit that then goes to the ether because Tarkin Town just popped it right off your board, and their 2 cost unit was able to take out whatever you played because it had less health, it feels really sad. And so, we want to try to avoid that if Tarkin Town is, and we want to try and monitor where we're using our ability if Tarkin Town is a big thing. Now, we can also bait Tarkin Town, right? I can put 2 units out there on the board, one of them knowing that I would go ahead. You want to take out R2? Here he is. We've done some damage to him. Use your Tarkin Town to get rid of 2 health, get rid of the 1 attack, or let me filter. There's ways that I can kind of bait that play, but it can also cost me a lot of things if that player is willing to sit and wait on Tarkin Town a little bit. So it's just kind of a thing to be mindful of with Han2. The Go Tall version seeks to play stable in the early game, and how it's going to do that is that it is going to either outvalue you with units that are on the board, and force you to make trades into them, or if it's got initiative and it needs to remove some things, then quite often it's going to be able to have played out Cassian and played out Cassian for 2. Well, Cassian's going to trade into just about, from what we have right now, every single turn 1 play, because most of them cap out at 3 health. Now it's going to defeat Cassian. That's okay. Eventually, once you get towards Han's flip turn and you're starting to talk about playing cards that are in the cost range of 7, 8, 9, but Han is playing them for 6, 7, and 8, you really start to kind of outvalue your opponents because those have a bigger, more immediate board impact. A thing that I've talked about in several videos to say that you want those cards to have an immediate impact if you are paying that much for them and you're spending your entire turn on them. This is a thing that Han is able to do early. If your opponents are ramping, hooray. I have Cham in my deck. I'm okay putting out a 5-2 with Cham and getting my resource back, and we'll get to my end units just 1 turn faster. Plus, General Rican can really be a major roadblock. He's just a big body, even if you cheat him out. And then a very strong top end. I said that home 1 was shown here. If you pay 7 for this, and then you play a unit from your discard pile that costs, that only cost you, that has a printed cost of 3, it comes out for free. And so you can get 10 of value out of this for 7, and that is a very, very good play. And then the Crate Dragon coming out for 8. Okay, well, that's great. It had 8 health instead of 10. I don't care. Them paying to remove it and dealing damage to their own base is quite acceptable. And if it gets to attack, then, that's like Devastator getting to attack, and heaven help you. This is the Kodamaran deck that won the PQ here. You can see 3 Confiscates in the main, which are 3 of the easiest cards to cut from this if your opponent is not playing a healthy dose of things that you need to remove. A couple of big plays here that I really love and that he has talked about in a video on his channel. One is General Rican, when played and on attack. You can either choose a friendly unit to gain Sentinel, or if that unit has Sentinel already, you can give an experience token to it. If you ambush this in, you can choose the when played ability and make him a 6/8. And so if you were to play this off of Timely Intervention, you can really make a big giant that is a hard thing to get around. Even if you play him in on 6 and you don't play him in with any kind of, even if you play him in on 5 instead of 6, you're talking about something that's a 5/5, which is a nice stat line for that turn. The Gorilla Attack Pod is a masterstroke in here. I really, really enjoyed hearing the thought process behind it. It's a grit unit, and putting 15 damage on a base is not that big of a it's not that big of a task. So being able to drop out a unit that becomes a 6/4 and readies is a genius stroke, and I love it. This is a card that I haven't seen consistently played since like set 1, maybe set 2 Sabine, but it's wonderfully used here. He did use the Rebellious Hammerhead, which does damage based on the cards in your hand. This really doesn't have a card draw engine to it, and so it's not my favorite thing to hold back a resource in order to do this. If it's cheated in, it does come in as a 5/5 in space on 5 resources. Um, so there is some merit to its play, but I'm trying something else out in that space in my deck. We'll see where it goes. And then you have the full complement of things there at the top end. Like we've said, you have Wrecker, you have Mace, you have Home One, you have Crate Dragon. Um, it's a nice solid package. This is a PQ winner. I think that this version does a better job than going small. Than if you had gone out here and said that we're going to put a much smaller group of the top end in here, and we're going to put a much wider and diverse group of the low end in here, and see how early we can get a second unit on the board. Because again, this doesn't really have a draw engine. Getting that second unit on the board in a turn depletes your hand very quickly, and once you run out of the ability to put down 2 cards, you kind of can run out of steam if you haven't overwhelmed your opponent already. A good control deck may be able to just weather that storm, and once it does, its top end is better than a go wide strategy. But that's just kind of decks being where they are. This is the version of it that I like. This is the version of it that I want to PQ. If you want a very full explanation, go to Kodamaran's site. I will link it in the video description. Poe and Luke. Last 2 leaders, we'll show 1 deck each. We'll give some final thoughts, and we'll be out of here. Poe is less restricted to fighters and is able to lean into vehicles of all varieties because his ability and his pilot's abilities in general don't really restrict themselves to fighters or any specific kind of vehicle. But Luke's leader ability requires a fighter. And so there is a heavier emphasis on that. Poe has a great ability to just go out and boost a vehicle. It's slow because it requires an action. And so if your opponents are able to deal with those vehicles or able to put some kind of roadblock in front of it, then you might just be sad. But at the same time, if you got a resource left and you've got a vehicle sitting around waiting, you can easily pop him into a vehicle, attack with it on the next turn. You can then move him to another vehicle because his ability allows you to jump in and jump out. You can also eject Poe, which is a great play. So you could have him on a vehicle, you could attack with the vehicle, and then play eject and put your leader on the ground where he is a 4/6 and quite a healthy get for 2. And the only card that it burns you if they deal with him is that it burns you eject instead of burning you a unit, which is a great play. The downside is that a savvy opponent can trap you on a vehicle, can trap Poe there. Perilous position. Okay, well, great. That thing is attacked. I don't really have a good way to defeat it. No good to me dead. Okay, well, 2 turns now. I can't attack with the Poe unless they do something to get rid of that thing. You could hop him to another vehicle, but you can't take him off of the vehicles. You couldn't just remove him and get him back to your leader zone. And so that's a power play that you can miss, and a smart play by your opponents, especially at the time of his flip turn, that can trap him on a vehicle. And if they're smart, I've main decked entrenched plenty of times. And if I'm not going to go to space and I am comfortable giving up that arena for a little while and saying that, you might ping me with some small fighters, I don't care about those. Or, I've dealt with the other fighters and I have the ability to target and take them out, but I want to trap Poe, and that's more important to me, then I can entrench the fighter that he's on, make it where it is impossible for you to really plow into something and defeat it. and then just have him stuck there because he can't use his epic action while he is deployed as a pilot. And also, what makes eject so powerful is that you're able to pop him out of a vehicle that your opponents think they have dealt with. Luke, as we said, his leader ability requires a fighter to attack. As a result, that deck is very, very fighter heavy. We don't have a lot of fighters in the game that have a health pool greater than 4. We've got a couple of them. We're getting another one in this next set, but we don't have a lot of them in red-green. There's a couple of 4s in the 2-drop spot. One of them is the no faction version, and the other one is the TIE Bomber, which has 0 attack but is villainy. So we're kind of out of luck when we're talking about big units here. So what you're going to wind up doing is you're going to wind up playing quite a lot of 2 and 3 drop fighters to be able to get off your things. I highly advise in that deck, if you are doing so, to play those fighters that have an on-attack ability. Because, as we talked about earlier, stay on target hotshot maneuver are 6 card spots in my loot deck because of their ability to bring in extra damage, draw cards, deal extra damage to things that are on the board, let my on-attack abilities work for me, and let the synergy of that on-attack ability work for me. And so those are the ways that I'm going to get around the fact that I have smaller units out in space. All right, let's show you Poe. Climb aboard, jump out. Black 1, because Poe is our leader, is an auto-include. You can see that we also included several other space units for him to be able to hop into. Blue Leader, as we discussed, is a unit that can come to the ground. And so you could play it for 3 or play it for 5 and ambush it on either side. But if you ambush it and you play it for 5, you could ambush something on the ground and wind up with what's left over of a 5/5 unit. Red 5 is still a great card in any of these decks. The ability that it has to deal 2 damage to a damaged unit is practically unparalleled. Sabine's Masterpiece, again, because we have multiple cards that are covering both red and green. Quite often we're going to get an experience token and do damage to something. That can be incredibly valuable if we ambush that in. So if we bring that in with a timely intervention for 4, and we have a green card and a red card on the table, we can effectively deal 5 damage with this. It becomes a 4/4 if we put the experience token on it and we get to ping something. And so it can punch above its weight when it comes to that. You have a very low top end because you're topping out at Wrecker. You're topping out the same place that a Sabine ECL deck typically topped out. Drawback here is if this is slower than Sabine ECL. It just is. Your action both requires a resource. Your leader action both requires a resource and doesn't do damage to a base directly. Sure, you can add to you can pilot something out there, but that doesn't allow you to follow your curve quite the same way that Sabine does in her natural progression. Because of things like eject, we have some good high power to be able to put Poe into the ground arena early and have a 4/6 unit that we really didn't do that much for. There's not a 4/6 in here that's for 3, which is effectively what happens when we are ejecting him from a unit. And so he's bigger than K2 at 3 resources, which is a nice play when you think about it that way. But that also means that we can use him later. We can use his epic action later. But is that enough to overcome just playing this deck as Sabine ECL? And the answer to that is I don't know. This is how I play Poe, though, and I like it in matchups where it is able to be a little bit more of a a little bit more of an aggro mid-range, and it can deal well with some of the things that are out there right now. Finally, we have Luke. I'm showing you the Energy Conversion Lab version of Luke. I play a similar version of this, and I play it with Tarkentown. But the link to that deck, or there's a video about that deck in the channel. I will let it speak for itself. Here, what we have is a lean, as I said, into on attack synergy, which brought in things like the Gray Squadron Y-Wing, and the ability to get out here and kind of hit with some of your things with hotshot maneuver. Use that Luke pilot, use those fighter synergies, ping away, deal some damage to units, soften things up so that you're able to pop through, or that you're able to clean up, especially if you can get Red 5 to stick. You put that out there, you start running Red 5, you're able to really, really put a hurting on people. Orbiting K-Wing is here just for a slightly larger fighter. You're paying for a 4/4 fighter that really does nothing. It's not my first choice. In reality, you probably could toss that and bump up to 3 apiece of Poe and Wrecker, and you would be just fine, and kind of stick with the smaller ships. But, for the example here, I went ahead and showed it. I left a slightly larger package of kind of options just to show 3 different pilot options that are out here for this deck. If you lean into that a little bit, the BB-8 that's there can ready several things that are here, and can make that a little bit easy, and that can make that a little bit interesting when you start talking about the math of being able to turn corners, just because you can ready some units and go ahead and attack with them in ways that your opponents didn't expect. Anyway, this is the Luke deck that I've got for you. If you like it and you want to try Luke, I did a much fuller video on him prior to the Jango Fett ban, so that's got a little bit more tech in there for that, but there we have it. Let's move to final thoughts. Sabine ECL and Sabine Data Vault are both very sturdy decks. We have seen Sabine ECL be a sturdy player in the meta since set 1. She is a heavy presence now. I expect that if you're going to sit down at a big, major tournament, you're probably going to see 10% plus of the decks that are there be Sabine, mostly ECL. You might see some Data Vaults. I would learn Data Vault if you're going to something big, just because, now that we've seen it be successful, there's much higher likelihood that we're going to see some people try it. And in doing so, helps to know the lines. Data Vault play lines, if you can master them, are much less known to most opponents. Her Data Vault and Han2's Data Vault, Han2's Go Wide Data Vault, are very similar to one another. I prefer the Sabine because of her ping. Han2, I think, is better in the Go Tall strategy than Sabine, just because of the resource cheat. He can get to his big units a turn earlier. That is, all the Han decks are aided by the downturn of Tarkentown. If we see Tarkentown come back up on the rise, be aware of that meta shift. Evaluate whether you would rather play Data Vault Sabine and play a little bit of a wider strategy and a little bit more of an aggro and kind of work your way towards some of those big units, or if you are going to stay on Han and just Tarkentown be damned. Poe is the stronger ground game of the 2 pilot leaders. I don't think he is as strong as Sabine in ECL, but I think that he has some legs to be able to take out some of the decks that are more prominent right now. And then Luke has the stronger space game, and we have seen since Jango went away, we have seen a big decrease in space-heavy decks. And so there is some gap there that he could fill. You're going to struggle into something like Piet. But, Piet has to get to his Sentinels before he can really slow you down. Otherwise, he's just, he's playing a card per turn and he's eating one of yours, and you can pretty easily put out 2 and pump something and do damage, draw cards. You've got a lot of engines in there that he does not. So, there's some legs to all of these. There's many different ways to play them beyond just what I gave you, but these are kind of the preferred lines and some of the places where people have won PQs and regionals so far. This is Green Hero. So until next time, take care.